Welcome to She Sells Radio. I am so excited for the conversation that we're going to have today with a very special guest and friend of mine. And I know we're going to get into some very tactical sales strategy today, but one of the things that I also know, and one of the things I really respect and appreciate about my guest, is that one of the biggest things he stands for is selling from heart and selling with heart. And you're going to hear that come through today. And I was actually, funny enough, we were just talking about this, Mark, behind the scenes, and how did we first get connected? And I was first connected to our guest today, Mark Magnacca, through a mutual friend and client. And I'd been hearing his name in the industry for years as the co-founder of this company called Allego, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's one of the leading sales learning and enablement platforms in the world. And we were introduced. He graciously invited me to come on his podcast when I first launched She Sells. So Mark is very much a friend of the brand and the community and the work that we're doing here in the She Sells world. And, I wanted to have him on the show today to talk about the new book that he co-authored, which is phenomenal. If you haven't read it yet, it's in the camera angle, Mastering Virtual Selling, because all of us are selling online in some way, shape, or form. And I know from many client conversations that there are parts of the sales process that can feel awkward, right? Or where we feel like we get hung up. And today I want to help clear all of those for you. We're going to bring Mark on to help so that you can confidently and boldly sell every single time. So Mark, my friend, welcome to the show. It's so good to have you here today.
Elise, really excited to be here and proud of how much progress you've made in such a short period of time.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for being a friend of the brand, a supporter of the brand. And I'm so excited for this conversation today and for this book. And so, and we were having such a great chat before I hit record. We're like, let's just hit record because I don't want to miss anything good that comes out here. So I think it would be great to start with is tell us a little bit about the inspiration for this book. So you've authored multiple books now. You wrote Mastering Virtual Selling recently. What was the inspiration for bringing this work into the world at this time?
It's a great question, Elise. And, really what happened is that my co-founder and I had been working on a different book. And as the pandemic began to unfold, we recognized through some brainstorming that he and I did together that all of a sudden, there were some efficiencies and some things happening. As much as we were experiencing the confusion and fear that was unfolding in 2020, we began to realize that there's some elements of this that actually kind of make sense. Now, you need to know that I had already been a virtual employee at my own company for the preceding 4 years, in that I lived an hour and a half away. And so when we co-founded the company, my co-founder lived closer to Boston and I lived 90 miles away. And basically the talent pool around Boston is much better than where I was. And so we just put the office there because it really made sense. But what that meant is I had a long commute, an hour and a half each direction. Yeah. So we agreed early up front, like, I don't need to be in the office. Interestingly, I said, I got to be there kind of about 2, maybe 3 days a week, but definitely not 5 days a week. So it's almost like in 2016, I had the epiphany that many people had in 2020 and 2021, which was, hey, there's a better way. Yeah. And I personally am the one who brought Zoom into our company because I was the heaviest user of remote. And we were using one of the other services, which I didn't like at all. And so then I started to learn a number of these things. And so as the pandemic started to unfold, this idea was, wait a minute. It's not just me who's learned, my co-founder has learned, and Tony Jerry, who is our third co-author, he spent a lifetime really mastering these skills, both in-person skills and the virtual skills. So we realized there's a huge amount of misinformation. There's a lot of people who think that this thing is like a temporary blip and we're going to go back to 2019. And we realized that with our combined knowledge, we could literally have what would be a super easy to consume encyclopedia of the best ideas to make this world easy to enter into versus struggling and kind of holding your breath, hoping it will go away.
Yeah. Gosh. Well, it's so neat. And I know, listening to this show, we've got we have entrepreneurs, we have people who have always sold online, and we've got, sales leaders and sales reps who are in some of the maybe more traditional industries where it may still they're still kind of, it's like, how do we transition our process this way? Right. I think most people at this point have developed a pretty solid process for selling online, and there's still mistakes we're all making in that sense. Right. So from where you're sitting, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making with selling virtually that you're like, if I could just help people stop doing this, it would make a huge difference in their success rate?
Okay, well, this may be the most valuable piece of insight I can offer, because if you get this one right, it literally solves 80% of the problem that most people have when it comes to virtual selling. So what I mean by that is that most people think they need to decide whether something should be virtual or in person and what the mix should be. And in fact, the very simple idea is that it's not about you, it's about them. So I say to any seller right now who says, I can't wait to get back, I actually don't care whether you can't wait to get back. What I would care about if I were you is, what do they want? So if I'm selling to Elise and I have one question that I ask, and maybe it's at the beginning of our conversation, Elise, maybe it's at the end, I say to you, for example, hey, Elise, just as I think about the upcoming meetings that we're going to be having, can you tell me, what is your preferred communication strategy? Do you prefer to do this virtually? Do you prefer to do it in person? Or do you prefer some combination of each? And then you tell me. Now, you tell me, if I were to ask you that question right now for you, what would your preferred communication strategy be?
Oh, I would be like, I love you, but I don't want to meet in person ever.
No, let's play this out, at least, because this is what people don't realize. You have a young child at home, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Let's just assume, right, that we decide to meet in person. And on that particular day, I happen to have a little cough, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is what people haven't realized. I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the book, we talk about Maestro Ben Zander. So I just did my podcast with Ben Zander that's coming out shortly. And he said, something remarkable's happened. I said, what's that? He said, nobody coughs in a concert anymore. And he said, I've been doing this for 45 years. There was always, or he'd be getting ready to start, there was always some people, it was like an unconscious tick, right?
Yeah.
That they just did that to clear their throat. He said, nobody coughs. And you know this because you've been on airplanes. So the point here is, unless there's a reason. So for example, if I said to you, hey, look, we don't need to get together for business, but I'm going to be in North Carolina and I'd love to go out to eat, and we're going to eat outside at a restaurant, just kind of get a chance to spend some time together. It doesn't mean that we don't ever want to get together. It just means that a lot of what we're going to do for work actually can be done better this way, or minimally. I say minimally, the biggest change is, I don't know of any CFO in the country right now who's going to justify an airline ticket, if you live in Boston, to fly to California for a first appointment, if you have not already had at least an initial conversation like this. Because my belief is, if I can't get you to come on this, which is really pretty easy, do I really want to invest traveling 3,000 miles for a first meeting?
Yeah.
So I think if you start with that framework, which is, let's start by asking them, the buyer, what do they care about? And if it turns out that it's in person, fine. The other thing I will acknowledge is that there is a absolute geographic difference in the United States on this topic. So I happen to be in Florida right now, and I happen to be from Massachusetts. There's a huge gap during this period of time in terms of the ability to meet in person and the ability to not meet in person. And in some states, you really have not been able to meet in person at all. And then in other states, it's been pretty much almost like many people are comfortable. So I recognize, and I add as a disclaimer, I recognize there's geographic distinctions, but my statement still holds. If you're in a state and you're asking someone and their personal values are, yeah, I want to get together, that's your call. And if you're in a state that says, you know what, I'd really rather not, I'd prefer to do it this way, then why not adapt versus trying to force it?
That's so good. To me, when you say that, it's like the platinum rule, right? Treat others the way they want to be treated. It
Exactly.
feels like that in terms of communication. Yeah, that's brilliant. Which, as you say that, it's like, I need to, one of our other guests recently, Brittany Hodak, talked about creating super fans. And that's like one of the key things she talks about is find out their communication style and, and communicate to them that way, which, by the way, if you two don't know each other, I need to introduce you, because it would
Yeah,
be,
well, sounds like right up my alley.
right
And
up your alley.
The interesting part about this, at least that I know immediately connects for you, is that for any of us who have an important personal relationship, whether it's in your marriage or in some other type of romantic relationship, isn't this a great idea in the same way?
It really
like if you really think
is.
about it, so you talked earlier about being able to sell from the heart, right? And the notion of basically saying, look, I'm not going to just impose on you the way I like to do it.
Yes.
If my goal is to interact with you, why don't I just ask you the question, what do you like? And it's the classic situation of, the guy who wants to hug and the woman who doesn't want to hug, or the guy who brings flowers and she's, it's not understanding that people have different convincer strategies in their personal life. And it turns out buyers have the same thing. And even within a committee, there's a culture that often forms, right? There's a culture around kind of the way we do things, even when it's unspoken. So the more you can do to elicit, in my experience, the knowledge for you about what do they like, what do they don't like, how do I adapt to what they want versus trying to push them to do it my way?
Yeah.
The more power you ultimately have.
Yeah, that's so good. And it ties in with one of the first parts of the book, which is about creating an exceptional buying experience. And I love that concept. I think that's something I'm always working to get better in with our clients. And that to me is like, when we can do that, it makes the rest of the sales process just tee up so smoothly. So I would love if you could speak to what are, 1 to 3 of the key points about creating that exceptional buying experience that you think is critical, whether it's online or offline, but obviously we can speak specifically to virtual here as well.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I would tell you is that what we've realized is that most people in sales follow this notion of a sales process, right? And they think of it as a funnel, and there's the top of the funnel as people are coming in and they're moving through the mid funnel. And at some point, I liken it in my own mind, almost like marbles going down into a funnel, and that, different marbles are sort of falling out of the funnel. And then you get down to this deep funnel, and all of a sudden, these are the really qualified, marketing qualified leads, as it's called, that salespeople are going to engage in. The problem with that is that that's not necessarily how your buyers think of themselves. Again, going back to this framework. So the whole world of sales training is all about the sales funnel, the sales funnel, the sales funnel. Well, the question is, what if buyers actually follow a journey that's different than the way you've organized the sales funnel? And what I mean by that is, what if most buyers, and McKinsey says this, and Forrester says this, and Gartner, I mean, they've all done independent research. It's all coming back to very close to the same thing. 60 to 70% of the research that's happening is happening before you interact with the salesperson. This is a complete sea change. When people used to go to buy a car 20 years ago, a new car came out, you didn't know anything. You had to go there to get the brochure. They'd give you the brochure. The person would walk you through it. But there was no doing information, right? When you worked with a stockbroker 20 years ago, you weren't doing a lot of research at that time online. It was maybe just starting, but most people were calling the expert, and the expert was telling them the information. When you went to the doctor, most people were not going to a medical library and sort of boning up on what the procedure might be or what the diagnosis might be. So recognizing that people are going through this buying experience needs to inform the way you interact. And my favorite one, at least, it comes up so often, and I'm not a shareholder in LinkedIn. I wish I was, but I'm not.
No kidding.
So I'm not promoting this for any specific reason, but whenever I meet people, and I sort of disregard most social media in the business context, except LinkedIn. And because I think for most business people, that's the one that really matters. But when I meet people who will say either A, I'm not on LinkedIn, or B, I go see their LinkedIn, they have no picture, they have nothing, right? I say to them, what you're missing is that you have this internal focus, which is, I don't use it, therefore it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You're forgetting they are Googling you. And what you don't know is because of LinkedIn, the number of hits it gets prioritized in the algorithm. So for people who don't have a big web presence, LinkedIn is often the first thing that comes up. Now I click the LinkedIn and you've got a bare bones presentation or a bare bones profile. You've got no picture, or you've got an ancient picture on there. All of a sudden, I just immediately start to form an opinion. And it's kind of like I got referred to an accountant recently. And it's a friend of mine who's a lawyer who referred me, gave me two names. And I said to him, I want you to know that one of the things important to me in the accountant that I would work with is they have to be technologically savvy. They have to do QuickBooks Online. They have to know these things, right? So of the two that he gave me, I Googled them both. The first one has no website. It has a phone number and an address in Google. The second one had a website.
Yeah.
I said to my wife, I'm like, I'm not even calling them.
Right.
I don't even want to talk to them.
Yeah, exactly.
If it's 2022 and you don't have a website, it's like a restaurant. If a restaurant has no website and they have no reviews, right? I don't really want to go unless I'm going with a friend who says, I've been here and I can vouch for it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the fundamental distinction. And it goes really back to what I was talking about, the very first thing we chatted about, which is get your mind oriented that the salesperson is really much more like a Sherpa guide helping someone navigate a buying process versus a marble falling through a funnel.
Yeah. Which would apply. I love that. And for those of us who are entrepreneurs or those listening who are entrepreneurs, it's like, you're often the salesperson, right? And you're in what you're doing. And so the same thing applies. What for you, I'm curious, that's such a great story about the accountant. Is there an exceptional buying experience you've had recently where you're like, they did this, or they did this, and this really stood out to me and made a big difference for me that made me ultimately choose, aside from obviously the website is important, having the virtual presence, but is there anything else even in terms of like customer touch points that were maybe a little different that made that exceptional?
Yeah. So coincidentally, this is literally, I'm going to just grab something.
Yeah,
I have to do show and tell here. Okay.
I love it. I love it.
Now, this woman completely knocked my socks off, Elise, because while I was going through this research, all right, I get a message on LinkedIn, and it turns out this woman is connected to someone I'm connected with, and she specializes in helping entrepreneurs. And so she sends me this short form video through LinkedIn, and I watch it and I think she must know all about Allego because I mean, she's totally using my buying strategy, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, we communicate by LinkedIn, and then we set up an appointment to talk. And I get this envelope that is, calligraphy style, and in the mail, she sends me the picture about her business. She sends me this, kind of like a brief overview, and then at least she sends me a treasury of quotations of Zig Ziglar and people like Joe Dispenza. It's got all these quotes. So it's just a quote book, right? Who does this?
I love this woman.
Before we get on the phone, she does this. All right.
Okay.
So then we get on the phone, and literally, she's the most compelling CPA I've ever met. Oh, coincidentally, both of her parents are CPAs. And she realized, I don't want to have a traditional CPA practice. And her target is entrepreneurs who really have specialized tax challenges and really some sophisticated strategies that's targeted to business owners. So anyway, she represents someone who worked both virtual. She used traditional mail. She used electronic media. She used virtual. She used referral. Like, she surrounded me. And despite my network of lots of different people who were sending me referrals, because I was asking, we've ultimately chosen her based on the buying experience.
Oh, I love that so much. Of course. And what I love about that, it's interesting. We've got a really good community of women specifically in financial services in our community. And I know Allego serves a huge portion of the financial services industry too. And one of the questions I keep getting is like, how do I stand out? How do I break through people's indifference. And it's obviously there's compliance in financial services. So there's things you can do and things you can't do that you might be able to do in other industries, but little things like that, just making it personal. It's not even a little thing. She put effort into it, but
She did. She did. By the way, she's someone you should talk to. That I'm going to introduce you to her.
Please do.
Yeah.
I was literally thinking that. I was like, I got to have her on the show.
Her name is Catherine Tyndall. And what I love is she's practiced what she's preached. And I'm going to tell you something, like at every step, Elise, like she's just got it dialed in. The reminder before the Zoom call, the email the day before saying, can you fill this thing out? Here's the secure portal, like all of the elements of it. And then realizing that she's executing on these things. So I'm telling you that sometimes the differentiation isn't the technology. The differentiation is your capacity to use the technology.
Ooh, the differentiation isn't the technology, it's the capacity to use the technology.
Meaning a lot of people have it, right? They have it, but they just don't know how to use it well. So the confluence of, she has the calendaring software, I can make the appointment, and then it automatically sends me this. And it's like, and she's a CPA. Most CPAs, my God, I have one of the CPAs that I interviewed, his email is at AOL.com. I'm like, goodness. Are you kidding me?
Sorry to anyone whose email is AOL.com.
Talk about like sending a message. Like I'm from another era,
But to me, what you're saying, which is true, is it's like we can't have the excuses of I'm just not tech savvy or that's not my thing. It's just, it can't be an excuse. Either learn it or hire someone to do it for you. Like if you want to be successful. Yeah.
Or be mediocre too. That's an option.
That's an option. Right? Yeah.
Right. So if you want to be exceptional, which is what we're talking about, an exceptional buying experience, you gotta figure out the subset of people that you care about enough to go the extra mile, because that's what they're going to notice. And you can't do it sometimes. You got to do it all the time.
All the time. Yeah. Gosh, this stuff fires me up because I feel like these are the things in the sales process that I saw missing for many, and it's no knock on any organization, but these things were missing in organizations I was a part of, and even sales coaching that was taught. It's like when you do these things right, and people feel important, when they feel seen, when they feel like you understand their preferences, I feel like that's, I don't know, 80-90% of the game. So
well, let me make a point, if I may, on that point, at least, because your listeners may not know this. All right. When I first was introduced to you, I had no idea about your background. I did do homework before we got on the call, but somehow because of the context had shifted, and you were going to be a professional speaker for a mutual client of ours, Ash Brokerage. I just, sort of saw you in that perspective. But what was interesting is we got to know each other. And then when I watched your presentation, you and I are representative of the fact that in the same way that most of the great religions have had evangelists who took the core message, but they modified it slightly for different audiences. With Christianity, one was for the Greeks, one was for the Romans, one was for the Jews, right? It was taking this core message and bringing it to different groups of people. Well, I took the message in 2003 with a book called The Product Is You, of personal branding to financial advisors. Now, I was a financial advisor. I spoke that language. I could interact with them. I knew the challenges and opportunities within the business, and I was able to take that knowledge and build a whole business out of it. And then when I saw you, and it had been, it was really 15 years later, you were doing many of the same things. And I commented to you on it. And it wasn't because you had read my book. It is because you had come to many of the same conclusions as I had. And when I watched your personal branding presentation, I thought, like, this is so cool. I mean, by the way, I wasn't in that business at that time because I'm in Allego, but I thought, wow, you've taken a message that I was using, you've built your own version of that, and you've customized it for a whole new subset, which, by the way, I probably wouldn't have resonated in the way you do for your target market. So part of what your listeners need to remember is it doesn't even have to be like something that you dream up that's completely unique. Very often the value is in the personalization, the customization, and really the person who's the subject matter expert or content creator, influencer, if you will. It's that person understanding this submarket.
That's so good. That's so good. I can only imagine in 2003, you were probably like the first person talking about personal branding, and at least in your space, I
I
would
was one of it.
imagine.
There was one
Yeah.
other person, but there were 600,000 financial advisors. So
That's a good market.
between him and I, there was, there was plenty of work for everybody
to do it. One of the other things, Mark, I'm so excited to ask you about, because I think this is a real superpower of yours. And I think this is also where what I hear from our community is for many, I never like making blanket statements, but what I hear from many of the members of our community is they feel good up until the close. Like they feel good. Like I love building rapport. I love building relationships. And sometimes they're making great friends and not moving people into action. And I know you're a master at all of that, right? And this isn't just blowing smoke. It's like we've had a relationship for a while now. I know you're great at relationship building. And I also know that you're great at driving people to action. Can you give us like 1 to 2 key things that you think help move people powerfully into making that decision and that close? And again, it can be customized to virtual or not, but I think that would be an area that people could really, really benefit from us having a conversation around.
Sure. No, I have some thoughts on this one, Elise.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. One of the things I know from my study of politics is that political capital is something that has to be used. It can't be stored away for long. Right. So what that means in politics is if you've had a win and you sort of have the wind at your back, you've won an election, for example, you have a limited period of time to sort of invest that capital and get things done with it, because it dissipates, right? There's sort of a half-life of political capital. And one of the things that I know is that a famous line from Jimmy Carter when he was president was, he said in the run up to his re-election, which he lost, was, one of the things about me that makes me unique is that I don't owe anyone any favors. So in other words, I'm not like most people in Washington. I don't owe anyone any favors. And what his opponent, Ronald Reagan, rightly called out was, that's true. And guess what? Nobody owes you any favors either. And in order to get things done, very often it's people doing favors for each other, because, all politics is local. So now let me transfer this over to the world of selling. One of the biggest mistakes, and remember, I have 2 daughters, so I'm highly attenuated to what I do believe is often, not always, back to your point, not always, but often a difference in the cultural communication style. And I'm just going to speak to women in North America, right? Sure. My 18-year-old daughter is a perfect example of it. And she's described to me that, being in a class in college, just the way people interact, she's less comfortable raising her hand and sort of getting into the fray than some of the men are. And it's not because she's not as smart or smarter, right? It's just like the way it is. And so we could debate, well, whether it should be that way or shouldn't be that way, or we could say, well, let's just get into your world and figure out how is it and what can you do to change? Yeah. So one of the things that I would tell you that in my experience is that the idea of the trial close is a critical element of getting it to be much easier. And what you have to realize is that if I just give and give and give, and I never ask for anything in return, I'm creating an imbalanced relationship. And I'll remind you, this metaphor goes back to the personal and even romantic relationships. Again, it's never good in anything when one person's here and one person's here. You can't have this deferential, sort of a genuflection of, well, you're the buyer, you're up here. It's right. No, we're meeting on what's called on the level. I have unique value. You have unique value. I'm not better than you, but I'm not worse than you either. And so if I can start with that, what it means is, hey, listen, at least I'm going to be giving you the following pieces of value. And one of the currencies you can pay me in is you're showing up to the meeting. One of them can be you're referring me to people. One of them can be you can be a testimonial for me. And all through the buying process, there are examples of ways that you can use your political capital, even though there's no money being exchanged. Yeah. So if you pulled 5 of your friends to come to a call with me and you're vouching for me, that has value. But beyond that, at least what you've now done is you've invested in this relationship. And so what I think happens sometimes is people are in the mindset that if I just give, ultimately it will pop. And sometimes that happens, but I'm telling you that the notion of a relationship balance, and I want to be very clear, that doesn't mean it's always, even in any marital relationship, it's never 50-50, right? Sometimes it's like this, and sometimes it's like that. And sometimes it's even way off, but recognizing that we both have to contribute. You know, we both have to want this, and it can't be me forcing it. So what I'll tell you is, when I was in the financial services business, if after meeting me twice, if you weren't ready to do something, move a $2,000 IRA account, open an account for $25 for a child, like if you weren't able to do something, then I would ask a series of questions, and I would very much make it clear that I have a lot to give. But the way that our compensation structure works is I can only give it for people who are actually clients of the firm. I don't just do it, you know, like a YouTube person who's out getting paid in that way. So getting comfortable with the conversation, understanding the value that you really bring, and then having some what I'll call breadcrumbs along the way, where the other party has to demonstrate their commitment as well, so that it's not a lopsided relationship.
Wow. I took so much from what you just said, and two of the things I want to kind of tie into what we teach in the She Sells community is, one is around self-worth. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I've kind of come to the conclusion in my own life and seen for my clients too, is your level of income will never exceed your level of self-worth.
100%.
100%. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. I mean, that is the governor, by the way. That's how it works.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Right? So we do a lot of that inner work here in the community. We talk a lot about like up leveling your self-worth and feeling worthy of the 7 figures, 6 figures, whatever it is that you want to make. Yep. And I think that, as you were talking about, like, it can't be lopsided. I know for me, when I was earlier in my sales career, I always felt lower than my buyers. And I always felt like I was chasing, and it was like I had to bend over backwards, and I didn't feel comfortable or confident asking for those, like you said, like their buy-in.
Yeah.
The breadcrumbs. I love that. Yeah. I love that. And I was messaging with the client about this morning, about like, how long does she continue to pursue someone who's maybe ghosting, maybe not? And like, this is not super popular probably in the sales training world, but one of the things I've just made the decision in my own life is like, I go where I'm wanted, not where I'm needed. Like, there are so many people who could use this, but I am not going to chase.
100%.
I'm not. So I'm curious. It just sounds like we're aligned there, which I appreciate.
I have to tell you that I over the founding of Allego, going back to 2013, I remember, by the way, the people who've ghosted me. Like, I'm very aware of it. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's a funny thing about the way the world works, because there's not many of them, but it is really interesting how some of the people who ghosted me when they were in power, when they lost power and then they were looking for a job, then they actually called me to say, like, could you help me? And I couldn't help but remind them, like, do you remember when I needed your help? Yeah. And you never even responded to me. Right. And so, I mean, sometimes just being able to call it out, because not everybody's oriented to think this way. So that's number one. Number two, at least I'll tell you this point you just talked about with respect to up leveling. I want to make sure everybody's clear on it. This is not some affirmation of I make $1 million, I make $1 million. This isn't about sort of externally putting something on top. It's about, in your heart, literally believing that there's value that exceeds what you are charging for what you do. That's the key, right? That I'm not taking from you. And everything you just described, honestly, is why I think for so long women didn't go into sales. Coincidentally, at Allego, our top 2 sellers are women. I love top that. 2. All right. I love that. And one of them has been the top since the beginning, since 2013, same person. She's number 1. All right. So what I will tell you is that I think a lot of the things you've described are the reason, they're one of the reasons, as this culture is adapted, that many super talented women like you basically thought, I don't really want to go into sales because of that whole dynamic. And what you're demonstrating to women now is, guess what? You don't have to play the game that way. It's almost like the rules were the guy takes me out to dinner, he pays for dinner, and now I'm sort of obliged to stay in this for, until 10 o'clock at night, right? Versus, no, actually, we're going to do it a different way. We're going Dutch. We're going to have a first meeting. We'll have a coffee or a drink together. And depending upon how that goes, we'll decide, or I'll decide if there's going to be a second meeting, right? So if you think about that, and you think about interviewing the prospect in the context of, is this somebody I really would want to help?
Yeah.
And then you start to find the persona of the people who are like that, and then it becomes fun. But otherwise, it can be a real drag if you're always chasing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's so powerful. And that's one of the things especially for women, because we're not wired as much to chase. So there's so many nuances that I think when we can all be in our respective power in terms of how we show up in our roles and how we, how we draw in clients, work with clients, it's like everyone wins. So this is incredible. I have probably 15 more questions that we don't have time for now. So I'll have to have you back on the show to dig in deeper. I want to ask two final questions. First, Mark, tell us, where can people go to get the book, to find out about you and connect with you? Because I know they're going to want to connect further.
You can go to masteringvirtualselling.com. All one word, Mastering Virtual Selling. The book's also available on Amazon, but at our own website, we've got a number of different resources, including an arsenal, which is a concept we talk about in the book, which is a collection of all of your best ideas in one place. And I'm on LinkedIn. It's Mark Magnacca, Magnacca, and you can feel free to connect with me. I like the LinkedIn community. It's a good fit. And so if you've got people who want to reach out, I'd be happy to chat with them. And at least I want to make sure that you remember that you play two very distinct roles. One, of course, as an entrepreneur and as a salesperson, and then another one is as a mother. So I tell you this for both the mothers and the fathers who are watching this. Yeah. Don't underestimate the power that you as parents have to help inform the thinking of what your children believe is possible. Because I can tell you, in my case, there's no question that it was my mother, who I lived with, because my parents were divorced, who informed a lot of my belief system. She didn't know about some of the people that you and I are familiar with, but she had tapped into it anyway. And she imparted into me this belief that, of course, you should be able to do that. Why wouldn't you be able to do that? And when you are exposed to that and you believe it, and then the world responds, it becomes this virtuous circle where you think, I can do anything, right? And so it's in our culture, it's been mothers even more than fathers who had that power. And the crazy thing about the pandemic is now many of us fathers are getting a chance to be around our children in a way that has really not been possible in the last 100 years of this culture, unless you were a farmer.
Wow. Gosh, that's so true. And I so appreciate you saying that too. That's one of the missions of this brand and this company, is that it's generational. And I know that's one of, I'm guessing by knowing you, that's one of your goals and missions too, is it's like, we're creating
Given I have children
change
from multiple generations, it has to be generational.
Well, that ties in. I love how this flows. That ties in with the last thing I wanted to ask you, which I've got to ask because it's the She Sells community, right? So you've got these two incredible daughters. What is the number one thing that you have learned from your daughters that's maybe a different perspective, a different way of thinking about the world and things than you had before they were in your life?
That's a great question. So just for full clarity, I have a total of 4 children. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. Yeah. And so it's interesting because I have kind of my own little experiment, both with my older children, and then, based on sort of what I learned with my younger children, and really being the same person in both of them and having very different outcomes in many ways. So what I will tell you is the concept of being in your heart. And, my younger daughter right now, as an example, she's one of these people at 2 years old, where she can provide one look, and the power of a look, a natural, authentic, like heart look from your daughter, from my daughter anyway, it's one of those things that just melts you. And it's the reason why songs are written about this. Like there's something about that. It's just magic. Number one. And I can tell you that from my elder daughter, who happens to be studying marine biology, what I've learned from her is she's been saying she's wanted to do this since she's 8 years old, and then 10 years old, and then 12 years old, and then 14 years old. And I kept like giving her a lot of different reasons. Like, are you sure? Is this really what you're interested in? And she's gone through really difficult classes, and she's stuck with it. And so I've learned this wonderful appreciation that she has her own self-generated perseverance in an industry that was largely male dominated, but happily she's been exposed to lots and lots of other women in her college career who are in this same realm now. Wow. So the piece I've learned from her is how important it is to have a community of other people to keep you going when you're trying to do something that not a lot of people like you have done. Yeah.
Gosh, that's so powerful. That's so powerful. I love both of those. Thank you so much, my friend. This was such a fun conversation. I knew it was going to be, but it was such a fun conversation. And I'm so excited about, I'm grateful. I will say this. I'm grateful that you are at the helm of a very significant company in the sales industry because of who you are and the change that you're affecting. So that makes me feel good about our future and where we're going. So thank you for your time. Thank you for writing this book. I highly, highly, highly recommend for everyone listening, go out and get Mastering Virtual Selling, connect with Mark on LinkedIn, phenomenal thought leader. And we just appreciate you so much.
Well, at least I'll leave you with this, particularly for the women in your audience. The beauty of what life is like in 2022 is the buying process is actually much more aligned to the feminine mindset today than it was in the past. So if ever there was a time that there was a natural advantage to using what makes women unique, it's now, because the way people and buyers in particular want to interact tends to be the way women prefer to communicate versus the older model of a more dominant trying to, sort of force a sale. Yeah. So I hope people take away that they're at the right place at the right time, especially those who are part of your community, to recognize that you haven't only done it, but that you are generous in sharing what you've done so they can do their own version of it for themselves.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I received that. All right. This is an amazing conversation. Thank you again. And thank you so much for listening. And so as you listen and, hopefully we're taking notes because there's a lot of good stuff in here. Take a screenshot, tag both me and Mark on social. Let us know what your biggest takeaway was. And I'm so grateful for you being a member of the She Sells community. So I will see you next week on our next episode of She Sells Radio. Bye for now.